First off, let's hear from Ross Chastain. Pretty excited to play spoiler.
Well, it's tough because in the moment, I'm looking in the rearview camera and I see the 24 and 48. I see the 24 most notably. He's one of the few guys that I would say I'm buddies with, and we get along more than I get along with most people. So would I have loved to see the 24 drive into victory lane and lock himself into the round of 8? Sure. But not enough to pass the one car because I'm driving it, and it was everything that I could do to stay in front of him.
So, Brad Gillie, I'll start with you. This is not the first time we've seen Ross Chastain in this position as he won the season-ending race out at Phoenix, much to the chagrin of Ryan Blaney.
Hey, look, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and the fact that you have some drivers that hadn't won this year, some drivers that were out of the playoffs, to me, I felt that we were going to see a handful of non-playoffs drivers going to victory lane. We did with Chris Buescher at Watkins Glen, now Ross Chastain, and think about the way things went yesterday. If it wasn't Ross Chastain, it could have been Kyle Busch. If it wasn't Kyle Busch or Chastain, maybe it could have been a Martin Truex Jr. He was fast all day as well, and I thought that was pretty spectacular the way this one played out in a race that I really thought was going to be a little more of a knockdown drag out between playoffs drivers because what's looming ahead between Talladega and the Roval.
And it's a big win, I think, too, for Ross Chastain in person. Been a rough year on him. He did not make the playoffs, Alexis, but now he's got another trophy in the trophy case.
Yeah, I mean, you always, want to make it to victory lane sooner rather than later. I'm sure he would rather it come earlier in the year and him be one of the drivers fighting in the playoffs right now, but it just didn't happen that way. You also have to think that the way the race played out yesterday lent itself to drivers who weren't running for a championship because, I think it was in stage 2, you had some drivers, Ross Chastain being one of them, that were able to kind of flip the stage a little bit because they didn't have to go for those stage points that were so valuable to a lot of the playoff drivers. So I think the fact that he wasn't running for a championship was one of the big reasons why he was able to get a victory yesterday.
Kyle, that seems to be the height of irony. I'm not in the running for the title, but it actually plays to my favor to maybe go out and get a race win.
Winning, you're in. Win in advance. Everything's about winning, but you can't use your win. You can't go for the win. You've got to go for the points.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, there is irony in that. And I found it interesting in Ross's thing, and I'm going to say things you never heard Kel Yarborough say. I looked in my rearview camera. Just to say that. I love that. But I think there is. And this is fascinating. This is what's fascinating me. And I don't know, and Brad and you guys, is the playoff drivers can't seem to get out of their own way. They make so many mistakes when they have control of the race and they relinquish it to another playoff driver that makes a mistake on pit road or on the racetrack and they give it up. And we've run 4 races and the playoffs, I guess, and half of them have been won by non-playoff drivers. I mean, that is a huge statement right there. And it's not that playoff drivers couldn't have won these races, shouldn't have won these races. They took themselves out. They took themselves out and put themselves in a position to be beat by these guys.
So, Brad Gillie, why was this Kansas race different than the ones that we've seen there recently? I felt like it was a lot calmer. Was that a byproduct of it being a playoff race?
That's a good point. I do feel, and to Kyle's point, there were people who took themselves out. But I do feel that in some ways, once we get into the playoffs, for a lot of people, it kind of calms things down just a little bit because everyone's on an agenda. Look, again, everyone knows what's ahead the next 2 weeks with Talladega and the Roval, and they wanted to get out of Kansas Speedway, grabbing enough points to be able to at least give themselves just a little bit of comfort if there is any with this schedule ahead. And I think we saw it at Bristol Motor Speedway, for example. It just seemed that people were giving each other a lot more room on the racetrack unless they were in a position where they had to protect something. Chase Briscoe had to protect something when Kyle Busch was trying to race him, and Kyle ultimately wrecked himself. But I do think the fact that, there's a bigger penalty for me messing up and having an issue than there is a reward for me doing something better. I think that has a lot to do with maybe some of the room that's given on the racetrack.
Which I think is pretty funny because even with that being stated, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Brad, we saw a lot of drivers mess up yesterday.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because they were trying so hard not to. I mean, there was a lot of missed opportunities from playoff drivers
There
yesterday.
were. And I think one of the calming factors is this also. And I think it came up yesterday during the race. We get down to 20 or 25 laps to go. There's 31 cars in the lead lap. You make a mistake and you're in the top 10, you finish 25th. You don't push it. You don't force the issue. You go ahead and take your eighth and you go to the house, and that's kind of the way it is. So I do believe, and Brad's spot on, that you give each other a little bit more room. It's a different kind of racing for these 12 guys.
All right, I'm going to come from left field with the next topic here, so I apologize ahead of time. Everywhere I go, people want to talk about racing, whether it's the grocery store, church, or whatever. The biggest thing that people want to talk about right now is, who is the guy on NBC calling the races?
Yeah.
And they're talking about Leigh Diffey.
Yeah.
And it's almost always the same thing. I don't know if I like him or not, but it's kind of weird. So, Kyle, I'll let you go.
And
Leigh Diffey's heritage is he is from Australia. He's been an American citizen for like 30 years. He's been around motorsports his entire life.
Knows motorsports as well or better than 99% of the people out there. I mean, present company excluded, because you guys know it too. You know what I mean? But you know things because you've been around the sport. You know things. He knows things because he's been around motorsports. He's been a part of this. He was. Let's go back to the Speed Channel. He worked for Speed and called qualifying and called different things. And here's the thing. It's way outside the box for what regular Cup fans and NASCAR fans are looking for. Just as it would be if you sent me to do a Formula One race. You know what I mean? I mean, nobody wants to hear a redneck Southern accent call. Those guys are going to say, what in God's name is going on over there? But,
I'd like to hear. I'd actually like to.
I do think what he does bring, and I do think what he brings a vast amount of knowledge. I'm going to say that. But the tenor and tone and the excitement that he brings to a call, it's just different. It working with him, and I'm going to say this: working pre-race, working post-race, doing things during the days with him. It's a different level. It's not that monotone that we get so many times. That thanks for being here. Thanks, another Cup race. And here's the start of the race. I mean, he gets excited about every moment, and I mean it's been. But I see it. I see it. It's just something. It's an acquired taste, and we're gonna get used to it, or we're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe I'm, a little bit different because I have watched him for quite some time call IndyCar, IndyCar races, that I pay attention to because my husband works for Penske, and obviously they're really big in IndyCar series. But so I'm used to hearing him, and you said most people say, well, I don't know if I like it. I know that I do like it. I do find him to be very engaging. He brings the energy, which is really like one of the biggest things you want is for, your play-by-play guy to bring the energy. And I think he does that wonderfully. And I think over time, fans will come to realize that he is meant to be in that position. He is meant to be that guy.
And listen, and I'll say this. If you don't like it, do like my grandfather Owens used to do. Watch it on TV and listen to Doug Rice.
There you go.
Well, you got two more races left to do that. And then, we'll listen to somebody else.
So, Brad, have you had any comments about that? Because it seems to be the thing that people want to talk to me about.
Oh, my gosh. Not really, to be honest with you. I've seen some on social media, especially when people say, who is this British guy? Which he's not. As you mentioned, he's Australian. But the one thing that did crack me up yesterday watching the broadcast was, you go from Leigh Diffey, you go to a set of commercials, and one of them is like a promo for the NFL Sunday Night Football, but it's the Crocodile Hunters kids who are doing it. So now you got two more Australian accents right there in the mix and everything. I love Leigh Diffey. I was so excited when they announced that he was going to come to the NASCAR side because it doesn't matter what it is. Look, you could have single car qualifying at Daytona and you're going to walk away and go, man, that was a pretty cool 3 hours.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw one more thing here. I think this car, and we've spoken about it on this show.
Right.
This car has opened us up to international drivers. It's open as nobody knows more about SVG than Leigh Diffey. I'm going to tell you that right now. Sitting here in this room, I've never spoken with anybody that knows more about his history, where he came from, where he was born, what he grew up doing, all this stuff, because he grew up that. He understands that part of it. So I do think that adds a little bit as we see that Australia tunes in and New Zealand tunes in, and we have that European audience that begins to watch Cup. I do think it's a plus.
I can tell you right now, if we do a big story on this show about SVG, what happens to the social media numbers, Alexis?
Yeah, they rise.
They go through the roof.
And it's funny because you can geolocate where those people are viewing from, and it is all Australia, New Zealand, that part. But they are very fond of of their Shane Van Gisbergen.
And I personally, I brought that up because it's the thing that people want to talk to me about. I'm a big Leigh Diffey fan. Always have been. I'm like Alexis. It didn't shock me because I knew what to expect from watching IndyCar and other forms of motorsports and what he was going to sound like. I find it really refreshing, but I think it's something, it is an interesting topic of how people look at that and they go, I just don't fit that accent with, Southern-based stock car racing.
I think he's so good though that give it just a little bit of time and he'll be the norm.
Kyle,
you know what I mean?
back
That will
in
be
the
the
day.
norm.
So I will go, and I was getting ready to say, I'm going to go all the way back to when they brought Jackie Stewart over to do NBC and stuff.
Yep.
Okay, and race fans and the Southern Motorsports Journal and all those papers, they would get letters. He has no place in Cup and NASCAR racing. Send him back to England. He's Scottish. You know what I mean? Same thing.
Right.
Everybody just thinks you're British. If you have an accent, you got to be British.